Hey, so we are in week 3 studying through the life of Joseph. And Joseph is one of the main key figures of the last few chapters, the book of Genesis. And if you're just now joining us, let me catch you up on kind of what we've studied, what we've seen the last few weeks. The story of Joseph is about the next to youngest brother of 12 brothers, the son of Jacob, and he had preferential treatment from his father, which turned into the resentment of the other 11 brothers, and they sold him into slavery. He's then sexually harassed by his boss's wife, wrongfully accused of assaulting her, then goes from being a slave servant to being a slave prisoner in the dungeon of Egypt. And that's where we pick up the story today. Now here's what you have to keep in mind. At the very beginning of Joseph's story, when he was probably 12 to 15 years old, he receives this vision from God for his life. That he's destined for greatness, that he's destined to be a leader, even though he's next to the bottom of the totem pole. And in the old patriarchal systems, he wouldn't have been the one chosen to be the next leader, but God kind of showed him several times throughout a dream vision that he was going to be leading the way one day. So here he is several years later, and his path seems like it's going the opposite direction. So I just want to give you some context for what's happening here, because I think we've all had the idea of where we thought we would be by now, right? I think we've all kind of defined what the ladder to success looks like. We all have these ideas of what we want to be when we grow up, and sometimes there's quite a gap between our expectations and the life that we are experiencing currently. And the story of Joseph is not just a story of how to deal with family drama. It's not just a story of how to overcome temptation. And today we're going to see it's not just a story of how to handle the tensions that come with your profession. It's a story of trust. It's a story of knowing that the path that God has me on may seem like it's moving in the opposite direction, but I can trust God with my tomorrow by being faithful with what's happening today. And so we've been trying to look at the story of Joseph with a bit of a relational overlay. Because you go through this story, there's guidance for how we handle like romantic relationships. There's guidance for how we handle our family, our sibling dynamic. And today, where we find ourselves with Joseph is how to handle ourselves in our careers, our professions, our calling. Let's be honest. What you put your hands and your mind to do gets the best 8 hours of your day, whether you're receiving a paycheck or not. So when you hear the idea of work drama, workplace relational tensions, you may be a stay-at-home parent, but I guarantee you, you've got a full-time job. Actually, you're working overtime, right? Like, let's just show some love to the stay-at-home parents in the room. Tom Brady couldn't do it, but you could. So wherever you find yourself working your hands and your mind, that's your occupation, that's your career, that's your calling. And God has placed you there for a reason. And I think the way that we approach our work says a lot about the perspective that we have on the path where God has placed us. It may not be where you'd like to be. You may not be making the amount of money you thought you would. And we're going to see here the way Joseph handled himself in the prison. He received leadership based on his servanthood. Opportunity has a funny way of coming to people who play their part well. But Thomas Edison says it like this: opportunity is missed by most people because it's dressed like overalls and it looks like work. I think what we're going to see today is God has a very high view of your calling, your occupation, and the tool belt that he's entrusted into you to steward. So let's see from Joseph today what it looks like for us to navigate the highs and the lows of where we spend the majority of our day working, expending mental energy and physical energy. Because where you are is no accident. It may not have been the dream job, but it's the job where God has placed you. And if we can learn how to process that with the perspective of heaven, I think we will see a little bit of heaven come to earth. Because one thing you're going to note about every stage of Joseph's journey toward actualizing his potential and realizing his calling is that he made things better. He made dark, difficult situations better. Whether it was being sold into slavery and becoming a servant in a guard's house, he was eventually trusted to oversee all the comings and goings in the administration of the house of Potiphar, the captain of Pharaoh's guard. And then when he gets thrown in prison, as we're going to see in a few moments, he rises up the ranks and gets entrusted to run the prison on behalf of the warden. And eventually he will see that leadership potential where he will be running the most powerful empire on planet Earth for Pharaoh in the midst of a famine. So we have to be able to take the struggles with the success and keep them in proper perspective. So turn with me to Genesis chapter 39. We're going to be picking up in verse 19. Potiphar was furious when he heard his wife's story about how Joseph had treated her. So he took Joseph and threw him into the prison where the king's prisoners were held, and there he remained. But the Lord was with Joseph in the prison and showed him his faithful love. And the Lord made Joseph a favorite with the prison warden. Before long, the warden put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners and over everything that happened in the prison. Then the warden had no more worries because Joseph took care of everything. The Lord was with him and caused everything he did to succeed. The Lord was with him even in the prison. The work that Joseph was doing, from being a servant in Potiphar's house to being a prisoner in Pharaoh's dungeon, the Lord was with him and caused success to find its way to Joseph's work ethic. God has a high view of work. It's one of the very first things that we see introduced into humanity in the creation story, just a few chapters before this. God spends 6 days creating the heavens and the earth, the land and the seas, the birds and the animals. And then he brings up Adam and Eve, and he tells Adam and Eve, he says, subdue creation. There is no other ancient cosmology where the central figure, the deity, says, I'm going to partner with you. Not only am I going to partner with you, I'm going to instill my likeness into you and entrust my responsibilities to you. Adam and Eve were told to name the animals, subdue the garden, and tend to their corner of creation. God has a high view of work. Adam had work before he had a wife. And when we view work the way God views it, it's no longer just career moves and submitting applications and updating our resumes and our LinkedIn profiles. See, what we see all throughout Genesis is a God who loves partnership. A God who loves to partner with people that are called by his name to represent his name and to take care of their part of creation. And so I think you and I have to examine where we find ourselves. We have to ask ourselves, am I following suit of this God who loves partnership? How does my cut of the garden look right now? How has my corner of creation, how is it developing? Is heaven invading the places where I spend my time? You see, then it's a lot more than just a career. When we have God's perspective on our work, everything changes. I believe that a job becomes a calling when we see work as worship. That what I do with my hands and how I expend my mental and emotional energies throughout the day is an opportunity to honor God. Later in the New Testament, in the book of Colossians, it would say, do everything, not as you're doing it for men. Like your boss isn't your boss. God is our boss. So whether we feel like we're at a dead-end job or a dream job, your job is more than just earning a paycheck to pay the bills and one day have a dream retirement. There's nothing wrong with all of those things, but ultimately we have to see our careers as callings to honor and glorify God and to bring Him with us everywhere we go. And when we look at our profession, our careers, our Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, whatever that may be, from a home office to a coffee shop to a clubhouse to the office place, you and I have an opportunity to honor God with what we do and how we do it. Now, here's the problem with the way we approach work here in the West, right? So much of our identity, so much of our sense of purpose and value is wrapped up in what we accomplish, right? We attach our sense of identity and our purpose to what is on our to-do list and how impressive our resume looks. Now, I do think God delights when we take initiative and get in gear, right? I think God is honored by work. But I think because we expect something from work, like purpose and meaning, that only God can give, no wonder we find ourselves caught up in the drama and the toxicity and the revolving door that is the modern American workforce, right? And it's really, really easy to just jump ship. We're going to talk more about that in a few minutes. We're living through what people are already calling the Great Resignation. But here's the thing. I'm not here. You may be in a dead-end job, and you may feel like you're dealing with a lot of drama at work, and it's a very toxic work environment. I'm not here to diminish the struggles that you may have, but I doubt what you're going through is close to Pharaoh's dungeon, right? But yet we see Joseph, as this timeline produces, before he actually becomes the right hand of Pharaoh, he spends a decade in this jail. And what does it say? God was with him. So your job may feel a little bit more like a prison than a profession right now. You may be going through some things that are not okay, but just know this. Don't think that God is absent when adversity is present. The author of Genesis is careful to note that God was with Joseph in the descent from the promised land of his ancestors, sold into slavery, the descent even into the dungeon, that God was with him every step of the way. And the way that Joseph conducted himself is what brought the hand of God's blessing on his life to continue him back on the ascent into his calling, into his true destiny, into his true purpose. The concept of work is something that is important to God all throughout Scripture, all the way even into the New Testament. In the book of 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, Paul is giving a sense of correction to a group of people who are convinced that the second coming of Christ is imminent. And so they've just kind of gone into this hunkered down retreat mode thinking, well, God's coming. It doesn't really matter with what we do because Jesus is about to rapture us all back up to heaven. And Paul is saying, no, you've missed the point. You're never supposed to go on the defense. Like, our work is supposed to be a place of ministry. And I want to read with you what he says all the way in the back. In chapter 4 of 1 Thessalonians, he says, make it your goal to live a quiet life, minding your own business and working with your hands just as we instructed you before. Then people who are not believers will respect the way you live, and you will not need to depend on others. A work ethic is essential to a Christian witness. The way we conduct ourselves, how dependable we are. Not just what we do for the bottom line, not just the status we have in the org chart. Remember, God has a high view of work, even for people like Joseph, who at the bottom end of the totem pole. What do we see in this story? It says that the warden turned over, entrusted everything, all of the operations and the management of the prison to a prisoner. So don't ever think you're in a dead-end job. Just maybe God has entrusted something into your hands to steward well, to point people toward Him. Is everything that you're doing at your workplace succeeding? You may not be getting rich. Don't judge this based on what you're putting away for retirement. Don't judge this based on where you find yourself in the org chart, because God doesn't need any of those things. God just needs a surrendered and trusting heart to do well with what is placed into your hands. See, the ancient Hebrew language here, when it's talking about the decision that was made for the warden to promote Joseph and to give him opportunity, had this idea of saying, I'm placing these responsibilities in your hand. And then we have that echoed when Paul says, live a quiet life and work with your hands. I think we have to ask ourselves right now, what's in my hands? What has God entrusted into my care? And as we start identifying those relationships at work, relationships at home, relationships that are social from the little league stands, cheering your kid on, responsibilities, the spiritual gifts that God has placed in your tool belt. Here's what I think we can learn from Joseph, that I should care the most about what's in my care. Nobody can care more about my faithfulness to God than me. I should be the one who is most excited and most eager to play the part that God has entrusted into me. And whether that's a support role, a behind the scenes role, or sometimes a front and center role. Nobody can care more than what God has placed in your care. And to help demonstrate this, I'm going to ask Matt and Connor and Andrew and Alicia and Gary to come down and kind of help me demonstrate something. Y'all come on down real quick. I've got a little bag here. In this illustration, I am God. And you guys are, on the journey, stewarding your opportunities. And here is the tool belt that God has entrusted into you. Without looking, just kind of pick one out of there. What you got? You're doing a lot of searching. Oh, Matt, you're going to be an artist. You got some acrylic paint. That is so like you. Connor, what do you got in there? Ooh, a power tool. Nice. Andrew, what you got in there? Oh, a maid. There we go. Alicia. Oh, you're a pharmacist. You got some ibuprofen. Nice. Gary, there's one last thing. Chef Gary, he's actually good at cooking. So, you feel like you got the short end of the stick? How many of you feel like you identify with Andrew here? Like, oh, man, like, come on, God. Like, this is what you've entrusted into me right now? If you could have anything else here, would you rather, be doing construction, chef, a pharmacist, or an artist?
I would trade with my brother Gary.
You'd rather be cooking, put something on that grill at home? I know. Sure. Well, guess what? You can't trade, because this is what's been entrusted into you. I want you to be the best maid you can.
Duly noted.
I want you to have some amazing Yelp reviews about how clean the office space is when you're done leaving it.
Yes, sir. Can do.
So here's the thing. You've all been entrusted with a tool. Something has been placed by God in your hand, and it is not there by accident. God wants to see a return on the investment that He has placed into our care. And it's not just about climbing the ladder. It's not just about earning the respect of your coworkers. It's about honoring God. Even if you find yourself in a toxic environment. God wants to tell a story with the instruments and the tools that He has placed on your belt. And I should care most about what's in my care. You should care most about what is in your care. Let's give it up for our labor team here. Thank you guys. I'll take all the gifts. Yeah, I'm going to need this ibuprofen. Yeah, there we go. Thank you guys so much. So how does this all kind of connect to drama at work? Well, here's the thing. We're always thinking about a change of environment, you know? We're in the middle of the Great Resignation. We're in the middle of the least loyal workforce in American history, thanks to millennials, people like me, right? There once was a time when you were putting a resume together that if there were too many jobs in your employment history, it would create some question marks with the place where you're submitting your resume. And now they're like, I don't care that that dude killed a dude. We need help. Hire him. There's nothing wrong with identifying how things are toxic. I mean, Joseph was in a prison. You probably saw some pretty jarring things. He was going through some really difficult things. And it's only human nature to be frustrated about frustrating things. But I think what we see here from the story of Joseph is it's not necessarily the right thing to seek out a change of environment. It's our job to seek out a change of heart and perspective about the environment where God has placed us. Now, you're not wrong for wanting to do better for yourself and your family. Matter of fact, if you go all the way back to Genesis 39, one page over, we see Joseph on verse 14 even vocalize that he's wanting to take steps toward getting out of prison. And he says it in verse 40, verse 14. He's basically given opportunity to help translate and interpret some dreams of some fellow prisoners that are going to basically, these prisoners are going to be put back in the courtroom of Pharaoh. And Joseph just kind of sees a moment, sees an opportunity, and what he does here, he's not being opportunistic. There's a difference between being opportunistic and recognizing an opportunity, right? And in verse 14, he says, please remember me and do me a favor when things go well for you. Mention me to Pharaoh so that he might let me out of this place, because I was kidnapped from my homeland, the land of the Hebrews, and now I'm here in prison, and I didn't do anything to deserve it. Guys, it is 100% okay to recognize what's not okay. You are not in the wrong to call out the things that are wrong about what is happening to you in your life right now. God sees everything and he knows you're going through it. Before we even ask him, he's aware of the pain and the frustrations and the things that are happening in our life, in our homes, around the water cooler, in the conference room, at the construction site. God is fully aware and not surprised of the situations that we're facing. But we have to remember, as we're looking to leave an impact, to leave a legacy, to take care of our corner of creation, to engage in God's restoration and redemption process for a lost and broken world, I think sometimes we're too quick to jump ship and look for the upgrade. Joseph was perfectly fine to ask, hey, just remember me. It's okay to knock on doors, right? It's okay to build up your LinkedIn profile just in case opportunity presents itself. But let's just keep it in proper perspective. When it comes to my future, when it comes to my advancement, when it comes to my promotions, I knock on the door, but God opens the door. And let's not reverse the process, right? We tend to kick the doors down and then ask God to bless the decisions that we forced. And Joseph was faithful to the task at hand, but also had his future, his vision, his purpose in mind. God, I don't really see how the path that you have put me on is leading toward this position of prominence and leadership, but you're God and I'm not, and I'm going to do the best to navigate through this profession that feels like a prison. But God, I'm also going to knock on some doors, and I'm just going to trust that when the right door is ready to open, that you will make it obvious. That's why my life verse is Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. It says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. Friends, chances are the path is not meant to stop where you are right now. That there is a next step, that there is a bright future ahead. But before we take that next step, I think we have to be willing to wrestle with this question, like, have I played my part well? Have I fulfilled the responsibilities faithfully that God has entrusted into my stewardship with this chapter, with this season? So how does this translate into alleviating the relational tension at work? Listen, I don't know that this is going to cause that person that talks really loud on the phone in the cubicle next to you to talk a little bit quieter. I don't know that this is going to end all of the work drama, but what I do know is that changes of heart are much more capable of changing our environment. We think that if we change our circumstances, then all of a sudden our heart will be changed. But if anything, Joseph's circumstances for the first part of his journey, for the first decade of his journey, weren't changes for the better. They were not improvements. The improvements followed his obedience. The improvements followed his faithfulness because God was with him in the adversity. So I think we all need to ask ourselves, like, who is benefiting from being my coworker? Who is benefiting from my contributions to the workplace? How is the kingdom of heaven advancing in the boardrooms where I find myself and the presentations that I give? Would people in your profession or your career be surprised if you extended a church invite to them as we approach Easter? See, as representatives of the love of Jesus, our presence should be a blessing, not a burden. Everywhere that Joseph went, it says that God's hand was with him, and because of Joseph's obedience and trust, everything he put his hands to succeeded. See, this isn't just about how to take care of the temper of your dramatic coworkers. This isn't just about being able to have less drama and less tension at work. Matter of fact, I think what we realize is we have little to no control over what people say, think, or do about us at our workplace. But what we do have control over is my own faithfulness and my own ability to choose to care about what is in my hand. And what we see as we revisit the verse in 1 Thessalonians is that people start connecting the dots. That your work, that your work ethic, that your conduct at work, the way you carry yourself, your countenance at work, our competency at work points people to Jesus. So as we begin to wrap up our time today and prepare for one last time, one last song of worship together, I would ask you to maybe consider spending a little bit less energy trying to control all the variables at your workplace, whether that's at home, home office, changing diapers, or creating spreadsheets and pitching budgets. Whatever you find that is placed in your care, what would it look like for you to care a little bit more about that and know that God in his sovereignty has you where you are for a reason? He also has something in mind for your future. But the best way to see our potential, our dreams become our reality, is to do our best with what God has put on your plate for today. The path to success has some ups and some downs. But like I shared earlier in Proverbs, when we don't just acknowledge our own instincts and our own impulses and our own desire for accomplishment, achievement, when we acknowledge Him in everything we do, the pathway emerges. And church, I desire deeply that the people who call this church home and who are being discipled as followers of Jesus here would be people that have the confidence of a straight path. But the only way we can have confidence in who we are at work and who we are as parents and who we are as professionals and who we are as workers, the only way we can have that healthy self-confidence, it comes from being confident in God's plan for my life. And sometimes God's plan for your life has chapters that we would rather avoid. And it's okay to vocalize that to God. But as we ask God to create opportunities, as we ask God to help guide us into something that feels more in line with my skills and is going to allow me to do better for my family. God, even though I'm asking for these things, I'm doing it open-handed, like I'm releasing the outcomes to you. And even if you don't answer me, even if the answer is no or the answer is wait, Lord, I trust you. I'm confident in your plan. You're going to write a better story than I could. Have your hopes, have your desires, dream your dreams. God has put you here to make an impact. God has put you here to be His partner. He's telling us all, subdue creation. This is an action term. Our faith is not meant to be on the sidelines. There is not a second string on this team. We are meant to get out of the stands and onto the field. God has a calling. God has given you a tool belt. Are you confident in that? The only way we become confident in that is through trusting in Him more. That's what discipleship is all about. That's what you're going to hear in every sermon that I preach. Is we have to learn to have a faith that causes us to trust Jesus more. And then you'll see God's hand on your life. And you'll find a little bit more grace for the people at your workplace that require a little more grace. And then you'll see God's hand on your life, where your spiritual gifts will have just this momentum behind them, and you'll be doing things that you never thought possible because you're underneath the guidance and the authority of the Spirit. And He's pointing you to the appointments, the opportunities that He has placed in our path. Would you trust Him? So let's bow our heads, let's close our eyes, let's enter into a holy moment of reflection as the team leads us in one final song. I think we've all got a unique next step to take. I think we've all got things in our work environment that we've been asking God to do something about. And my hope is today that you realize He did. He placed you there. You're what God has done. You are the solution. You are there not just to earn a paycheck. You are there to help people see Jesus.